Welcome back to another Millennial Minute. Today's tough question: should cannabis users pay an extra tax? You've already heard from our guests, Jacob Rich, he's a policy analyst for the Reason Foundation, and Kat Murti, she's the executive director of Feminists for Liberty. So part of the Millennial Minute is that we agree, and sometimes our panelists agree. And in this case, you both say the history is shameful and a tax is not the solution. Kat, tell me a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of the problems that we see around cannabis, particularly the racist problems that we see around cannabis, really come from the fact of prohibition. And although I think that the people promoting a social equity tax have their hearts in the right place, fundamentally what they'll be doing is pushing cannabis back onto the black market and making sure that those who are most marginalized will be yet again targeted. As I mentioned earlier, despite legalization, we're continuing to see racialized arrest rates, including in places that have been legalized. And it's in fact gotten worse in many places. And the more that we push taxation and regulation and other further laws, the worse that's going to be.
Yeah, but Jacob, one of the things that they do about packaging the full legalization of cannabis is that it's going to be a bonanza for governments, right? I hear this all the time. I had a guest recently on my podcast talk about this. Should we not view cannabis as a big way to raise revenue for local and state governments and perhaps even the federal government?
No, absolutely. We should look at cannabis as a way to be raising revenue, and that we will be raising revenue because there will be taxes. But the social equity tax is not included with the typical sales tax. That's going to be an additional tax, and it's going to be earmarked for programs that are probably not going to be addressing social equity. They'll say social equity on the outside, but it's probably going to be managers, bureaucracies, and the companies that have been contracted that are going to end up benefiting from these programs. If you really wanted to help people who have been hurt by the drug war, why don't you just write checks to the people who were actually thrown in prison? They're the ones who were harmed. Pay them for the prison time that they should have never done in the first place. It's probably the most efficient way to go about it. So yes, I mean, I've written about how if we legalize at the federal level, we'll see tens of millions of dollars increase in the federal coffers. But the social equity tax, that's just an additional tax on top of the sales tax that already exists. And it's probably going to promote the black market because the black market competes with the legal market. And the more expensive the legal market is through a social equity tax, the more sales the black market's going to have, and we're really just running around in circles, creating the same problems that we've always had.
So both of you are displaying skepticism around, these types of initiatives that tend to right the wrongs of the past. Try to say that 3 times, right? How do we right the wrongs, right? But not really take it out of the hands of a government that actually harmed these people in the first place? How do we do that, Kat?
Absolutely. There's several different measures that we need to do here. Number one is that people who were arrested, who served time or are currently serving time in states that have legalized, where the crime for which they were arrested is no longer a crime, need to be released. They need to be pardoned. We also need to, a lot of these laws, as we're passing them, don't allow people who priorly were convicted of cannabis crimes to be involved in these new legal businesses. Those people have the best comparative advantage. They know what they're doing. They have the experience to do it, and they should be allowed to compete, and they should be allowed to get into the business and do better.
I have that same question for you, Jacob, because that's fascinating, right? You want to right the wrongs, but you are still testing people for federal jobs with drug tests. How does that make any sense, Jacob?
It makes absolutely no sense at all. But one thing to keep in mind is that marijuana has been only legalized at the state level. And the way to think about it is there really is no legal marijuana in the United States. If you consume marijuana anywhere, it's really a crime. And state level, quote, legalization should really only be looked at as state level decriminalization. Because if a federal agent came into these states, they'd have full authority to arrest you and punish you to the maximum extent of the law. And additionally, this actually leaks into all sorts of other policy areas. If you have a medical marijuana card, you are not legally allowed to own a gun. In fact, it's a felony. And if you're caught with a gun and your marijuana, chances are you're going to be thrown in prison, and then your Second Amendment rights will be taken away from you for the rest of eternity. And when we're trying to address these types of laws, expungement is obviously the first thing we need to do. Release people from prison, expunge the records, and basically start treating people who have used marijuana now and have used marijuana in the past as people who drink alcohol, which is like regular citizens.
Wow. So